This shop is protected by the Demon King. By Bottle 7. Chapter 3. She counted us, 8 of us in total. She checked twice as if trying to make sure she didn't miss anyone. Before I knew it, a metal carriage was called and we were transported away from the alley. The woman spoke rapidly to the person driving in the front. They seemed to be friends. I didn't pay much attention as I lay with my family in the back seat doing my best to warm them with my magic. At one point she stopped talking and looked at me strangely. I could tell she knew what I was doing. But I did not care. My family was more important right now. We were transported further and further away from the taller buildings out to an area where the buildings were much smaller and quaint looking. The person driving and the woman carried me and my siblings in our box home out of the car and into a building. I had poked my head out over the edge to see where they were taking us. My eyes widened when I saw the sign, "Eye of Newt Magic Shop." I suppose it wasn't that surprising that a witch would own a magic shop. But I had been uncertain whether this world would have merchants of magic or not because of how difficult it was to perform any spell. The inside of the shop had bookshelves that reached the ceiling and were stuffed full of tomes. Magic items littered the shop shelves and counters. Herbs hung from the ceiling near windows drying. Crystals were everywhere. It was almost all too similar to the magic shops of my old world. Though some of these things were considered child's play in my last. We were carried to the back where the woman reached back behind a beaded curtain and opened a door. Up the stairs was a small living space. The box was set down in the corner near a window. The woman handed the person who had helped carry us up money before they left. It seemed I had been mistaken. That person had not been a friend. The woman quickly stripped her jacket off and got to work creating a space for my family. Newspapers covered the floor inside of a gated pen. Slowly she lifted each of us out of the box, placing us one by one onto a small pile of heated blankets. I sat on the blanket watching as she grabbed her communication device. I believe it was called a cell phone based on what I had heard and saw from newspaper scraps in the alley. She spoke with someone, and in a few short minutes, someone showed up wearing a white coat and carrying several bags. Bowls were filled up with food and water placed in the pen. The white-coated person lifted my siblings up, checking on each of them. Medicine was given to them and me, and I cooperated, feeling grateful to receive medical attention. One by one we were placed back into the pen. I lay next to my mother and siblings. The warmth from the blankets radiated from under us, and I felt their bodies slowly warm. My eyes felt heavy. It felt like only seconds before I heard a ferocious bark from my mother. "Stay away from them." My eyes snapped open and I scrambled to my feet, seeing my siblings all awake, huddled in a corner around me. My mother standing in the way of the woman and the person in the white coat. Her back arched and her teeth were bared. A low threatening growl rumbled out of her. "Now calm down, Mama, we're not going to hurt you," the person in the white coat said reassuringly. They reached for my mother and she snapped at them. "Mama, what's wrong?" one of my brothers asked. "Stay where you are," Mother ordered. "Humans are bad," she explained. "How did we get here?" One of my sisters whimpered out, now scared that they were in the presence of something bad. I asked for help. My voice was small coming out of me. They thought humans were bad. While I was sure that they could in fact be terrible based on the scars on my mother's body, I couldn't help but wonder. Even worry what they would think if they knew who I was. If humans were bad, what did that make me? My mother looked over at me and I slowly pushed past my siblings that surrounded me. My clawed feet clicked softly against the newspaper-covered wooden floors. "We are here, 'cause I asked for help." I spoke standing just a few inches away from my mother. A dumbfounded expression formed in her eyes and she slowly sat down staring at me. "Why?" she asked, her voice was soft. I glanced over at the woman who had helped us. There was a patient expression on the woman's face. I'm not like everyone else. I struggled to explain myself, I'm different. I looked back at my mother. "I told you you're like your father." My mother responded, her ears flattening against her head. "Mother." I sighed softly, and a breath left my nose in a soft snort. My ears folded back. "Look at me, aside from my father. How many others have you met with red eyes?" I asked. My mother went to speak but I spoke over her. "Mother, could father do things like me?" I asked. My mother was silent, she glanced at the others. "I love all my children the same." She spoke after a moment. "I know." I whispered, moving closer to her. "We were freezing to death." I spoke, my mother's gaze was steady on my siblings. "Humans? You can't trust them. They'll make you fight." She whimpered out her words, looking increasingly upset. A tear trickled down her cheek. "I don't want that for you. Any of you." She looked back at me, concern clear in her eyes. I placed my small paw on hers. "This one is different, Mother." I promised. "How so?" Her voice was sharp as she narrowed her eyes at me. I looked back at the witch who was watching this scene quietly. "She's like me." I spoke quietly, I swallowed. I had avoided this, only hinting, but she knows magic. She has it like I do. My mother's stare was unwavering on me. A long breath left her and she leaned down, licking my face. "My sweet child." She spoke affectionately. She pulled back and looked at the woman. "I'll trust her for now," she decided, getting up. At first she was going to move over to my siblings before spotting some food in a bowl. "Maybe we'll do a checkup on her later," I heard the woman suggest. The person in a white coat nodded quietly, handing off some medication to the woman before leaving. "If there are any changes, call me, okay, Cersei?" The person spoke. The woman, who I now assumed was named Cersei, nodded. Once the person left, Cersei was left alone with us. She clasped her hands together and slowly approached the edge of the pen. Without her boots on, she was much shorter than expected. I sat there watching her as she approached. My mother let out a soft growl of warning as she ate. Cersei did not reach for me and smiled, crouching down. Her raven hair spilled over her shoulder. She smiled softly at me. "Thank the gods that everyone seems to be doing well," she remarked, pleased. "Yes." I agreed, feeling relief. My tail wagged only slightly in response. Cersei moved to a seated position on the floor, finding it more comfortable. "So my veterinarian friend is going to take a better look at you all later," she explained. "They'll make sure none of you are sick," she added in a gentle tone. The soft tone slowly attracted some of my siblings, who waddled up to sit beside me, their stubby tails wagging at the friendly tone. "She seems nice," one of my brothers remarked, looking at me. "She is nice? She got us out of the cold," I explained. "Cold?" one of my sisters asked. "I don't remember cold. I remember being sleepy." She glanced up at the ceiling thoughtfully. "That's because you were freezing to death," I muttered to myself. My siblings gave me confused looks, not understanding the concept of death. "Death?" one of my other sisters asked. "Don't worry about that." Mother spoke from behind us. She sat there staring down at the small woman. The woman stared back quietly. She leaned back, tilting her head, watching us with great curiosity. "I wonder if you all appearing is a sign from Lady Hecate?" she asked aloud. My ears perked up, hearing the reverence in her tone. It had been a tone that I had not heard in quite some time. I could only assume based on that tone This Lady Hecate was a goddess of some manner. Witches in my last life were a mixed bunch, some of them more religious than others. It seemed that may be the case in this life as well. This Lady Hecate was the first god of this world that I had been introduced to. I wondered if perhaps she had a hand in my rebirth. Should she be associated with dogs? That may very well be the case. She sat up slowly standing, my mother growled slightly, she leaned over, "You guys need more food," she announced, wandering off into what appeared to be her kitchen and returning with a bag that seemed much too large for her to lift. "This would be easier with Jay here," she grunted as she lugged and sat the bag down with a loud thud. Digging into the bag, she pulled out a cup and started to pour more food into the large bowl that my mother had cleaned out. "Jay said you guys should eat a lot," she huffed, "so don't worry about finishing this. There's more where that came from." She put her hands on her hips proudly. I glanced over at my mother, who seemed perplexed but still wary. Once Circe was satisfied with the amount of food, she smiled pleased. Then she seemed to wander off to the other side of the room where strange objects sat on a table. There was a lot of moon imagery with different phases. My mother and siblings seemed less interested than I was. My mother wandered over onto the heated blankets, settling down, my siblings quickly surrounding her to eat. "Child!" she called for me. I turned, tearing my eyes away from the altar that I saw. The scent of cinnamon filled my nose, and I turned again, seeing that Circe had lit a candle and was quietly praying. "Child!" my mother called again. I slowly trotted over and joined my siblings to nurse. With a fuller stomach afterward, I sleepily sat on the edge of the pen, watching through the bars everything Circe was doing. My youngest sister waddled up to me, flopping down and leaning against me before closing her eyes. Everyone was tired. It had been a long day. As my eyes slowly closed against my will, I felt relieved that my family and I were a little safer now. As I fell asleep, I felt more of my siblings climb around me and on top of me. I let my tail wag just a little as I drifted off.